What's up, everybody? It's the Common Sense Investor coming at you with another video. And in this video, I want to talk about what exactly is a Brazilian depositary receipt. And when I get through laying out the case of the Brazilian depositary receipt scam, you be the jury and decide, did Citigroup violate the law in creating these Brazilian depositary receipts? Or were they justified and legal in doing so? And are the allegations that Al and Jordan brought against Citigroup, did Citigroup do what Al and Jordan says? Okay, so we're going to look into all that. When I get through explaining exactly what a Brazilian depositary receipt is, you will be the jury and decide whether Citigroup violated the law. Let's begin. What is a Brazilian depositary receipt? All right. Let's take a look at the beginning of the definition of what exactly is a Brazilian depositary receipt. It's when an investor that owns shares of an American stock, it makes no difference what stock it is. It's AMC, it's Microsoft, it's Intel, it's Home Depot. If the investor owns shares in that stock, they can request that the stock be sold on the Brazilian stock exchange. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. If Home Depot wanted to sell 25 million shares of Home Depot on the Brazilian market, then Citigroup would act as an underwriter and they would produce the paperwork necessary to list 25 million shares of Home Depot on the open market in Brazil. If Home Depot decided to do that, that would be what's called a sponsored BDR, which means the company is involved in the selling of that security on the Brazilian market. If the investor is not the company, perhaps say it's Virtue or it's Citadel or it's Susquehanna or any of the number of other hedge funds and market makers that are out there, they say they own 25 million shares of Home Depot and they would like to sell those shares of Home Depot on the Brazilian market. Can they do that? Absolutely. That's their shares. They paid for it. They can do what they want with it. They can open up that position on the Brazilian market with the shares of Home Depot that they own. All right, there is nothing wrong with that. You have sponsored and you have unsponsored BDRs. Sponsored is when the company does it. Unsponsored is when someone other than the company starts the process of selling a security on the Brazilian market. Okay, now let's turn our attention to AMC and the Brazilian depositary receipts that are over there as far as it relates to AMC. Now, the Brazilian depositary receipts that were written were unsponsored BDRs. We now know that an unsponsored BDR means that AMC Theaters as a company had no part in creating the Brazilian depositary receipts. The fact that they are unsponsored depositary receipts shows that someone other than AMC called Citigroup, told them they had shares to sell on AMC on the Brazilian market. Okay, so AMC is not the culprit here. Whoever contacted Citigroup and Citigroup facilitated the transaction, they're the guilty parties, okay? So that brings the first question is, who is the unsponsored individual who claims to have 513 million shares of AMC that they want to put on the Brazilian market? That's the first question. Who is it? Now let's turn our attention back to Home Depot for a few moments, okay? Virtue has 25 million shares of Home Depot in their vault. Okay, they own those shares. And they decide they want to sell those shares on the Brazilian market. Here's the process they have to go through. All right. First, they have to okay it with the Brazilians that they can sell it on their stock exchange. Once that's approved, then they will send the shares to the banker, which in this case is Citigroup, and Citigroup will facilitate the transactions and the paperwork. Now, one of the important parts of the paperwork is this, people. If they sold 25 million shares of Home Depot, all right, in Brazil, then they have to register that sale with the DTC. However many C's. The point is this. They have to report that transaction to the DTCC so they can remove those 25 million shares off the New York Stock Exchange. Now, for shits and giggles and hypothetical reasons only, let's say that Home Depot has a float of 300 million shares. It's not, but let's just say that it is. And Virtue came in and bought up 25 million shares of Home Depot on the New York Stock Exchange. Okay? Now, in order for them to write a Brazilian depositary receipt, they have to report to the DTCC that they are removing the 25 million shares of Home Depot off of the New York Stock Exchange and going to start investing it in the Brazilian Stock Exchange. Okay? That is a very important step. Let's see if something went wrong, okay? Number one, we know somebody contacted Citigroup and told Citigroup they held 513 million shares of AMC and that they wanted to sell those shares of AMC on the Brazilian Stock Exchange, okay? Now, the process here is once the paperwork has been established and they are allowed to sell those shares on the Brazilian Stock Exchange, they take those 513 million shares of AMC, they send them to Citigroup. Citigroup uses those shares to underwrite the Brazilian depositary receipts. And at the same time, they're supposed to report the transaction to the DTCC so they can remove those amount of shares off the New York Stock Exchange so they're no longer traded. They will now be traded over here on the Brazilian market. But did they report the transaction to the DTCC, or did the DTCC find out about it and just simply ignore the fact of and let them trade unregistered shares of AMC, 513 million unregistered shares of AMC to the Brazilian Stock Exchange? And now that you understand how all this shit works, it's time for you to vote, all right? As a juror, you have to come up with the following answers. Comment down below. All right, was there fuckery going on whenever they created the Brazilian depositary receipts? Well, we have to answer these questions. Number one, who laid claim to owning 513 million shares of AMC? Number two, Citigroup claims to hold possession of 513 million shares as collateral for the Brazilian depositary receipts. Okay? So Citigroup is saying that they are holding in possession, in their custody, 513 million shares of AMC at that moment when they created the Brazilian depositary receipts. How is that possible when they were trading on the New York Stock Exchange? Next question. To the DTCC, did they report to you that they were going to create 513 million Brazilian depositary receipts? And if so, why didn't you remove that amount off the float in AMC, which would have delisted it? Why did you allow them to create or sell synthetic, naked, or unregistered shares of AMC to the Brazilians? Because you can't have 513 million tied up in custody to be the collateral for this Brazilian depositary receipt and still have them trading over here on the New York Stock Exchange, DTCC. How did that happen? Do you think that these questions need to be answered? If so, comment that Citigroup is guilty or not guilty of fuckery when it came around and to the depositary receipts in Brazil and the AMC shares they claim to be holding. Do you think they need to answer these questions in court? Comment down below. And with that, I love y'all. Be blessed, and I'll see you in the next video where I'll be talking about the Al from Boston and Jordan lawsuit and the Brazilian depositary receipts, and what is their allegations, and are their allegations valid? Which, I'll be honest with you, some are and some aren't. So with that, I love y'all, and I'll see y'all in the next video.